My name is Alex Beamer. I am the director of band and orchestra with West Music Company. And I have to tell you, I'm beyond thrilled tonight to have our clinician, Steve Fidyk. Um, you know, I have a personal relationship with Steve, as Steve was one of my musical mentors and teachers as I was coming up as a young musician. So, to be able to sit back and watch him um, share all the things that he shared with me with you all is going to be fantastic. So, Steve is an educator, fantastic dog, great mentor, of course, fantastic drummer. Played with the Army Blues, retired from the Army Blues for a number of years, and just quite frankly, all around great guy. So, we're happy to have him here. And Steve, I will just go ahead and pass it over to you. I'll moderate the chat. So if you have any questions, throw it into the chat. And at the end, if you have any other questions, we'll let you just unmute and ask Steve directly. So without further ado, Steve.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Alex, for that very, very warm welcome. I'd like to just take a moment and say hello and welcome everyone to this masterclass, Continuous Learning Through Music and Creativity. Whenever I have the opportunity to do a masterclass like this, I like to keep it as informal as I possibly can. So, as Alex mentioned, at any point, if you have a question, please put it in the chat or raise your hand. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. I feel very fortunate to have this opportunity and to also speak about drumming and speak about my musical experiences and the experiences that I've had with my teachers. Most of the teaching that I do is solely based on those two factors. I spent 21 years with the Army Blues Jazz Ensemble here in Washington, D.C., so working with a great 17-piece jazz ensemble, reading and interpreting big band charts, classic literature, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Stan Kenton, and also original music that was written by the band. So that was a wonderful experience. I also lead a small group of my own and have 3 solo recordings out with that group. And from the experience of working with the Army Blues, that really helped not only my playing and my musicality, but also helped me to develop relationships and a better understanding of how my instrument related to all the other instrumentalists in the band. Before I joined that group, I really considered the drums and only the drums when I sat down and played. It was a very self-centered type of an approach, if you will. I sat down, I played, I was concerned about my sound, I was concerned about my time feel, but I wasn't doing the most important thing. And the most important thing is listening, listening to all the instrumentalists that you're playing with, but also listening to what they need from you as a musician. I like to think of myself as a musician that chooses the drums to play, to express my voice, my own creativity. And so, and I think of myself as a lifelong learner. I'm constantly checking out new music, transcribing, practicing. I'm curious, always asking questions. This is how you become a continuous learner. Peter Erskine once told me in a conversation early on in my career, I was so concerned about making it. And he just looked at me, he said, "What do you mean by making it?" He said, "You know what making it means to me?" And I said, "Well, no, what does it mean to you, Peter? I mean, you played with Stan Kenton and Maynard Ferguson and Weather Report and all these great bands." And he said, "Making it is playing good music with quality people. And you're doing that." And so if you could find yourself in a situation where you have a creative voice and you're able to play good music that makes you feel good, makes people dance, makes other people forget about their day-to-day issues and day-to-day troubles when they come to hear you play, and it feels like a family when you're playing with those musicians, then you're doing something right. You're doing something right. So many aspects that we can talk about with drumming, with drum set. We could talk about the mechanical aspects of playing. We could talk about some of the musical aspects of playing. And I can leave this pretty open. So if anyone has questions, like I mentioned, please do ask and put these in the chat. But for me, it all boils down to two principles, really, two principles. The first is that drumming is motion and that you're going to sound the way you move. Okay, so drumming is motion and you're going to sound the way you move. So if you're moving erratically, if your setup isn't ergonomic to your body configuration, in other words, if you have to reach for cymbals or reach for your toms, if you don't have a good center when you're behind the instrument, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to express yourself musically. And the second principle, and this might sound like very common sense advice, and I guess it is, but second principle is if you listen and study music, you will play musically. Okay, so if you listen and study music, you will play musically. Those are the two basic principles that I try to live my musical life by. So drumming is motion. So when I set up, I'm always trying to find my center, and I center myself on the snare drum. I center myself on the snare drum. The truth of the matter is you're going to play the drum set only as well as you play the snare drum. Okay? So for those of you that are on the call that are a little younger, that maybe are starting out and you're in elementary band or middle school band, and you're starting out on a drum pad or on a snare drum and you're learning your rudiments or you're learning how to read, you're learning notation, it all starts with the snare drum. And the reason that is so that you could develop a balanced sound hand to hand on one surface. Because if you can't get a balanced sound on one surface hand to hand, you might as well forget about trying to get a balanced sound on a multi-surface instrument like the drum set. Okay? This particular kit, this Mapex kit that I have in front of me, 4 drums and 3 cymbals. So when I play here in a moment, I'm going to try to blend these 7 sounds together so that I could come out with one unified pulse. All right? And I'm using my hands and my feet to do this. So it really does help if you have a concept of sound on one surface before you move around the instrument and play. The second thing is balance point. Okay? So when I'm practicing my technical exercises, I think about it almost like I'm doing yoga, which of course I don't do yoga, but if I were to do yoga, that's kind of how I would think it would feel. I know a lot of people that do, and they say it's very relaxing for them. So this is like a moment in my day where I could go to my happy place. I can go to my drum room, I could sit in front of my mirror, I could take my snare drum with my drum pad on it, with a metronome, and just check out my form to make sure that everything is working anatomically correct, that I'm addressing the drum in a way that is nonsensical. And what I mean by that is I'm allowing the sticks to rebound off of each surface, and in doing so, I'll get the most clarity of sound, the most clear sound, the most beautiful sound. And your sound is your signature. Your sound is your signature. So we center ourselves and we try to find the fulcrum or the balance point. So the first thing I do when I'm practicing is I just try to find that balance point of the stick. If I'm holding that stick too far back, it's going to die. It's not going to rebound. If I'm holding it too far forward, choking up on it, I'm not going to get any rebound. Once I have that balance point, and that fulcrum, and I'm centered on the instrument, then I sit down and I improvise. Right? So first thing, when I'm practicing early in the morning, I'll come down here and I'll just sit down and I'll improvise. And I'll hit record. And then I'll listen back to it. And usually when I'm improvising, I'll make mistakes. But of course, when you're improvising, there are no mistakes, right? They're just improvisations. So as I'm playing, I'm recording myself, and then I go back and I listen to it. And what I felt at the moment, in the moment, that was a mistake, I try to take that nugget, that motive, and develop it in my practicing. So that's a way of practicing that focuses on creativity and improvisation. Okay? So once you have the balance point, sit down behind the instrument and improvise. Improvise, okay? So I'm going to just take about a minute or two and just play a little bit for you so I can get a balance on the drums, and hopefully everyone's dialed in and they can hear everything clearly. And then we'll move on. We'll talk about some warm-ups. We'll talk about some jazz drumming concepts, because most of my living has been made by playing in small groups and in large ensembles. So from a jazz drummer's perspective, talk about some basic coordination, some fulcrums and grips, some ways of using the metronome for practice, answer any questions that you might have. Sound good? Hopefully it sounds cool for everybody.
Yes, sir. Yeah, man.
I saw someone put up a hand clap emoji. That's awesome.
Here you go. How about
That's my first hand. That's my first hand clap emoji ever.
glad?
Usually when I teach students and I'm improvising, they usually leave the call. So I really appreciate you all staying on and listening.
You had somebody join, actually. There you go. It's quite the
Oh
opposite.
my goodness! Wow. Yeah. Wow. That is good. That's good. So we find our fulcrum point. We find the balance point of the stick. We allow the stick to freely rebound. We're dribbling the sticks, right? We're allowing the sticks to work for ourselves when we play. This basic concept that was first showed to me by Ed Soph, and then further developed by my next teacher after Ed Soph moved to North Texas and taught down in Denton, was Joe Morello, and he studied with George Lawrence Stone. And so the system that George Lawrence Stone taught was the level system. So if you're looking for a way to develop greater dynamic diversity in your playing, I don't know of a better system to use than the level system. I'll grab my pad so that I can talk a little bit while I'm playing. And the level system is essentially, there's 3 levels and then sub-levels in between the 3. But the first level is your full stroke level, which will take care of your forte and fortissimo dynamic, right? Approximately 18 inches off of the drum head or off the cymbal, or in this case, off the pad. And drummers, like baseball players, you know, in baseball, a player's power comes from bat speed, right, when they're coming around the plate. For drummers, our intensity comes from how fast we throw the sticks down to the drum or to the cymbal. So if we need to produce more volume or more intensity from the rhythms that we're playing, try using a faster downstroke velocity. Throw it down fast, get out of the way of it, allow the stick to come back, and catch it at the top. So we start at the top and we stop at the top. We throw it down and we catch. Throw and catch. Very, very loose in the fulcrum. Only holding the stick as tight as you need so that it doesn't fly out of your hand. So that's the full stroke level. The next level is your half stroke level. Half the distance, half the volume. Full strokes are 18 inches off the drum. Half strokes are approximately 9 inches off the drum. And then for softer playing, mezzo piano, piano, pianissimo, grace notes like flams or drags, you'll use the low level. And the interesting thing about the low level versus the half stroke level versus the full stroke level is the combination of components of your wrist, forearm, and fingers that are being used. For example, when you're playing soft, you're primarily using wrist and fingers. So that's wrist and fingers, not a lot of forearm involved. When you get to the half stroke position, it's pretty much all wrist, and the fingers are on the stick for control. But again, everything's connected. So when I'm moving my wrist, my forearm's moving, and so is my upper arm. Nothing's tucked in. Everything is loose. Everything's turning. So that's the half stroke. But the full stroke position, you're using your wrist, but you're also using your forearm. So they're combinations. There's combinations involved. Full stroke, wrist and forearm and upper arm. Half stroke, primarily wrist, and in the softer playing and for grace notes, it's combinations of fingers and wrist. However, it's important to note that your wrist is involved in all areas of playing. If you noticed, as I explained that, I mentioned the wrist each and every time. The wrist is the engine in your Mercedes-Benz. Okay? The wrist is the engine in your Mercedes-Benz. Think of your entire finger, wrist, forearm, and upper arm as your car. And the wrist is the engine that drives that car. It's involved in all areas of playing. From here to the front of your fingertips, softer playing. From here back, bigger, stronger playing. If you don't believe me, go check out any great drummer that you're listening to, that you're really into, and if they get a big sound, they're probably using larger muscle groups combined with their wrist. If they're getting a really small sound, and that may be the sound that they're looking for, they may play like this. But you know, if you're thinking about it in a musical way, if you're playing in a trio or a quartet, that's plenty of sound, right? That's plenty of sound. You may pick up the sticks a third of the night and play brushes the other 2/3 of the night. If you're playing in an R&B group, a funk group, you're going to use your forearms and upper arms to get a bigger sound. If you're playing in a big band, you're going to use more forearm to get bigger sound, a bigger sound that projects to the back of the hall, but also across the block. So I encourage you guys, when you're practicing, to spend some time checking out your technique and asking yourself, are the techniques that you're using the most efficient for the music you're trying to make? Okay? If you're playing in a trio, think about it. You know, can you hear the piano player? Can you hear the bass player when you're playing? If you're not, you're probably playing too much. You're playing too loud, and you're not being sensitive to the other musicians that you're playing with. So think about the music. Think about the musical relationships that you find yourself in. Think about the band that you're playing with, and try to make your technique work for the music. But don't think about don't think about the technique when you're playing, of course. Think about the music. Just listen and play. All of the thinking and all the concentrating takes place in this room. It takes place here in front of the mirror, recording myself, working on my technical exercises, working on my coordination, working on the tunes, the music that I'm preparing. But when I'm on the bandstand, I don't think about any of that, any of the fundamentals. I'm trying to interact, initiate rhythm and sound with everyone that I'm playing with. I'm having a conversation, playing creative music with others. So I don't like to talk to myself. I want to listen to everyone, and I want to respond to their conversation and try to make everyone on the bandstand sound better. I think that's really the job of what a drummer is trying to make everyone on the bandstand sound better. So after I improvise a little bit, then I'll do a warm-up. And this is a flexibility and mobility warm-up that I like to do using single strokes, double strokes, and paradiddles. If you guys have a pad handy, you could try this. You could use any subdivision that you'd like also. Maybe we'll start with eighth notes, right? So we'll get our pulse with our feet, 4 quarter notes with the bass drum, 2 and 4 with the hi-hat. We'll play straight eighth notes, hand-to-hand single strokes, and then doubles, and then paradiddles. So trying to keep everything sounding as consistent as I possibly can hand to hand. Then what I'll do is I'll create shapes around the drums. So this is a good warm-up in terms of mobility, moving around the instrument. singles, doubles, and paradiddles. Eighth notes, right? Then we do it in triplet form. Starting on the snare drum first, then move it around the drums. Singles, doubles, paradiddles. Doubles. Paradiddles. Then finally, as 16th notes. Doubles. Paradiddles. Now we move it around the drums. So that's a warm-up. That's a warm-up that I like to use, but I also like to take some of those shapes and apply them when keeping time. And when keeping time, most phrases in Western music are built on 4 bars, right? So you could try some of these shapes and some of these stickings and some of these subdivisions and plug them in into maybe the 4th measure of a 4-bar phrase. So play time for 3 bars, and then play one of these shapes, one of these subdivisions, one of these stickings in the 4th measure. So maybe if you're thinking in a jazz context or 8th note triplet subdivision, that would sound like this. Right? So that's the start. That's the start of signaling when you're playing time. Right? So when we're playing time, we're in a jazz setting, for example, we're using the ride cymbal and the hi-hat. The ride cymbal is it's the river, it's the flow. It's the flow of the phrasing. It's what all the other instrumentalists in the band are listening to. They're listening to the ride cymbal. They're listening for the bounce. They're listening for the quarter note pulse. They're listening to the and of 2 and the and of 4, which helps dictate the phrasing. It's the beacon. It helps lead the band. And so since it's a triplet subdivision, that works very, very well, that little 4-beat fill idea. But I think it's important to realize that when you're keeping time, this is the flow and this is the pulse. When you play a fill, you're signaling another section of the composition. So in other words, whenever you're playing time or whenever you're filling, when you're listening to your favorite drummers, there's a reason that those players are playing that fill at that point. That fill may be acting as a transition to another phrase, right? Or maybe to the top of the form of a 12-bar blues, or maybe into the bridge of a tune. So I say this because in my teaching, I have a number of students who are working out of different method books. And of course, I have nothing against method books. I've written 9 of them myself. But the problem, though, with it is if you don't balance those methods with music, you don't really understand why those ideas in that book are written the way they are. And I don't know very many instrumentalists, very many musicians that get called to play gigs and they're playing material from method books verbatim. Method books are great if you have a specific issue with your coordination or your technique, or a certain concept of playing in a surface type of a learning environment, perhaps, but it's not the end all. It's not the end all. So try to make a connection. If you're studying a book and you're studying phrasing from a book or fills from a book, realize that those fills have a purpose. They have a meaning, and that meaning connects back to the music, okay? Another example, maybe in a duple format. You can use some of those same ideas, some of those same shapes in that warm-up in your fills. 3 bars of time, 1 bar of fill. 2, 3. So you're creating different shapes as opposed to moving down the horn in the same direction. Top to bottom, high voice to low voice, right? Most drummers will fill, right? They'll play that way naturally. But try breaking up different sticking patterns when you're playing your fills, and it'll make your fills, make your solo ideas that much more interesting. Even that simple fill. If you start that fill on the E of the beat, it's going to sound so much different. Here it is on the downbeat. On the end, 1. On the So when you learn something, whenever you learn something, try to come up with 3 to 5 new ways of practicing it. And also take that information and try to have conversations with other musicians with that information. The more ways you use that information, the more it will become a part of you. It'll become integrated into your style of playing. Okay, to me, it's the best way to learn. And you don't need to inundate yourself with a bunch of information. Just take one thing. Just take one thing and come up with different ways of playing it. Another fill idea, like a 5-note grouping. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A simple 5-note grouping in 8th notes. Right? So that's a cool sound. That's a cool sound. Let's put a pulse to it. 1. Now I'm going to try and use that idea when I'm improvising, thinking Aaba form, which is a musical form, very common form, simple form used in so many jazz standards. A are sections that are the same, B is the bridge. So Aaba. So maybe one motive will be an A motive or an idea, and then a B motive will be another idea. Now I'll put a pulse to it. 1. So taking two ideas, one's a 5-note grouping, one is a rhythm that Art Blakey played a lot. And I'm staring at a picture of Art Blakey, so that sort of inspired me to play that. He would play 1. So that little eighth rest, eighth note triplet grouping. I mean, I don't sound like Art Blakey when I play it, but I'm inspired by his playing. I'm inspired by Max Roach's playing. I'm inspired by Joe Morello and Shelly Manne and Jack Sperling and so many great jazz drummers. I'll just take one little rhythm that was a signature rhythm of theirs and just try to have some fun and improvise with it. If there's one thing the pandemic has taught us all, is the importance of being able to improvise, right? So we've all become better improvisers throughout this pandemic. And so I think if you could think about the instrument in some of these ways, when you sit down and play, you may have more fun with it as you're working through new material, So let's pivot and talk about some jazz drumming concepts. Probably on the call we have some jazz drummers, some jazz aficionados, those that really like jazz drumming, but we also probably have some that are really into rock and to funk playing and maybe heavy metal, just more aggressive duple styles of playing. And you know, it's all valid and it's all great as long as the music is well rehearsed and well recorded and played with integrity. I love it all. I love it all, and I try to work on as many different styles of playing as I can, so that when I get a call to play music with others, if I'm flexible on the bandstand and I have a flexible playing style, then I'll probably have more opportunities to play. But some of the differences, perhaps, in jazz drumming versus rock or funk playing are the sizes, right? The sizes of the drums. Usually big touring kits, the smallest drum maybe you'll see is maybe a 12, and then a 13, 14, 16, 22, 24-inch kick, really deep snare drum. This is more of a vintage bebop type of a setup that I use. Try to get tones, more of a tonal sound, a perfect fourth from the floor tom to the small tom. Like a minor third, perhaps. So the reason for that is so that when I'm playing acoustic improvisational music standards, I can play melodies and interpret melodies on the drums and cymbals if I have my drums tuned and they're open and they have a more of a vintage sound, which these Mapex Design Lab Cherry Bomb drums do have. They have a very vintage sound, but they also have a center. There's a core to the sound, so you can hear the front of the note, you can hear the attack, but it's not all attack. There's body to it. There's body to these drums. So the sizes of the drums play a large part in the differences between a jazz drummer's sound and maybe a rock drummer's sound. Also cymbals that are darker, lower, and oftentimes have rivets installed in them. Rivets help the sound of the cymbal sustain. So if you're playing with brushes, playing a ballad with brushes, probably even better example. So the sound sustains, the cymbal sound sustains a little more. And jazz drummers use rivets in a number of their cymbals. Rock drummers tend to use cymbals that are a little brighter because of the amplification that's involved in that music, cutting, playing with electronic instruments. Jazz musicians tend to play with acoustic instruments. Also sounds, specific sounds that belong to the jazz lexicon, like the stick shot. Right? A very sharp sound. Roy Haynes, for example. Roy Haynes used the stick shot in so many different rhythms and over so many different recordings with so many different artists. He played it in eighth notes. He played it in eighth note triplets. 2, 1, 2, 3. Played it in triplet form. 2, 3, 4. Right? So it's a jazz sound. It's a jazz sound. Buddy Rich. So many jazz drummers use that sound. Philly Joe Jones. It's a staccato sound. It's a sharp sound. It's a projecting sound. Buzz strokes or press rolls. Another sound that is a jazz fundamental sound. Mixed stickings. Like in the warm-up that I demonstrated a few minutes ago. Lots of doubles mixed with singles. Whereas in more rock or funk playing, you're going to have more single stroke playing because this music is more staccato based. In improvisational music with acoustic instruments, again, we're relating to a tenor saxophonist, we're relating to a trombonist, we're relating to a pianist. And when they play, especially the horn players, of course, they need to breathe, right? And they need to finger or slide their notes. So when they play, they have high points or accents in their line, and they also have legato, a very legato sound when they play their eighth notes. We can approximate that sound, that legato sound, by playing with mixed stickings, right? Double strokes. Using the press roll will give us even more of a legato sound. use of brushes, right? The use of wire brushes, really a jazz sound. So if some of the students on the call are really into rock or really into funk, I encourage you guys to check out some jazz drummers and to try some of these basic fundamental sounds and experiment with them and try to discover different rhythms and different shapes when you use these sounds. And as you discover different shapes while you're playing with these sounds and improvising, chances are, like I mentioned, it's going to stick and you're going to have an opportunity to use this information, and it'll be a part of you. It'll be a part of your sound. It'll be a part of your style. Before we move on, do we have any questions in the chat?
No questions right now, Steve, but I have one. You were talking about levels earlier.
Yeah.
Sticking, and made me specifically think a little bit about Molar Technique, and I was wondering if you might want to just touch on the whip and two taps and how that can some things.
Yeah. So Gus Molar was a rudimental snare drummer from New England who invented this technique of using his entire arm to create accent power, right? So the Molar technique is an accenting technique, and you could use it match grip, you could use a traditional grip. He used a traditional grip because he played rope tension snare drum, and the rope tension snare drum was a lot like the size of my floor tom. This floor tom is 14 inches by 14 inches, right? 14 inches round by 14 inches deep. And so in order to play to the bottom head where the snares were, you needed to use a lot of forearm and accent power by using your upper arm in order to get a sound. On a snare drum like this, you can just tap the drum and you're going to get a sound. But on a rope tension drum with gut snares and calfskin heads, you have to use larger muscle groups. Right? So more use of the forearm and upper arm when accenting. And so it's a whipping stroke. So if you start from this low level position, you just take your forearm up. The wrist collapses, and you whip that stick down, creating a lot of forward motion. So kind of like if you took one end of a garden hose and you picked it up and you created like an S in it, you just kind of lassoed that garden hose, you'd see that shape move forward through the hose. Same idea. Very, very strong sound, very strong sound. Now, one subdivision that works really well when learning Molar is the eighth note triplet. You could do it hand to hand. Right, so you're preparing each accent with your forearm. So it's down, up, 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 down, up. And the elbow strikes your side just before the accent. Okay, so it's an accent and two taps, and the taps are from this low level position. You could do it also with one hand. When you play it faster, it becomes compressed or modified. A good exercise to work on, if you want to develop that, is to take one triplet grouping per side with an accent on the downbeat, and do that for 50 times, and then go to the next tier as two triplet groupings per side, then 3 triplet groupings per side, and finally 4 triplet groupings per side. That was an exercise from Joe Morello's book Master Studies, and it's an exercise called the Stone Killer, which is in that book, and it's an exercise that George Lawrence Stone gave to Joe. I'll just condense it a little bit for you. It's 1 triplet per side. 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, So that's 8 times the line. If you do it 50 times the line, you're going to build a lot of endurance. And endurance is really, really important, guys, gals. You got to remember, when you're playing in a band, the drummer and the bass player are playing every beat. We're protecting every quarter note. We're playing the entire time. And if we don't take a look at least, examine at least the way we address the instrument, making sure that we have the proper fulcrum, balance point, we're allowing the sticks to rebound, relaxing breathing. You know, this is a moving object. These are stationary objects. When a moving object strikes a stationary object, that's a collision, right? So where is that going to be absorbed? Are you going to absorb that in your small muscle groups by clenching the stick, or are you going to try to absorb that shock throughout your entire body? And you know, the looser you hold the stick, the better, the better. In your handout, there's 3 or 4 pages of some articles that I've written for Modern Drummer on different fulcrums, a small analysis, if you will, of the way Tony Williams held his drumstick when playing time on the ride cymbal, compared to the way Shelly Manne held his stick, compared to the way Elvin Jones held his drumstick. And there's nothing more wandering than a drummer's fulcrum when you play. In other words, if you go to a teacher and they tell you this is the way to play and this is the only way to play, I would question it, because there's more than one musical style. So if this technique is working for you and you're getting a really big sound and all the musicians on the bandstand love the way you're playing and contributing to the music, and you're holding the stick and it's a little unorthodox, but you're not hurting yourself, there's no problem. There's no problem. You just don't want to be hurting yourself when you play. Morello taught an orchestral and a rudimental snare drum technique. That's because he studied with Stone, who was an orchestral player, but also was a great rudimental snare drummer. He also studied with Billy Gladstone of Radio City Music Hall, who was an incredible snare drummer, classical snare drummer, and made his own snare drums, Gladstone snare drums. And Joe was a rudimental snare drum champion in his own right in New England in the 1940s. So this drum set tradition comes from the rudimental tradition. That's why we work on our rudiments. That's why it's important to work on your rudiments. Take your rudiments and improvise with your rudiments when you're practicing them. The 13 essential, the 26, the 40 PAS rudiments, all the future rudiments and all the DCI drum corps rudiments. Take them and try to apply them on the drums. They're the scales of the drums. They're the scales of the drums. Horn players have to know key centers and major and minor scales, and they have to know modes. They have to know all of this language and rhythm. rhythm is our stock and trade. When you're in a band, everyone's looking toward you, to you, as the authority on rhythm and time and polyrhythm. So,
Hey Steve, actually, we had a couple questions in the chat,
okay.
and we're getting a little long on time here, but that's okay. I want to see if we can get some of these questions answered here. John asked if you could talk a little bit about your bass drum technique, and then Joseph was asking, he was interested in the set up the band part in the handout that you passed.
Okay.
So bass drum technique and set up the band.
Okay. The bass drum technique, I primarily play heel down rebounding. Heel down rebounding. Especially on a drum that's wide open like this drum is. So this is a 14 by 18 inch bass drum. So with very minimal muffling. So when I'm improvising on a drum set like this, I'm using the bass drum as a third hand. So I'm substituting my right foot. So primarily heel down. If I need more volume, I'll come heel up. But on a drum like this, I'll still allow the beater to rebound. When playing soft, the stroke's originating from the ankle. So if I'm playing with brushes and I'm playing softly, I just want to balance the sound, the high sound of the brushes. And I want to get a little bottom with that, so I'll add the quarter note pulse softly. But if I'm playing with instruments that are electronic, then I'll be more heel up, and I'll try to rebound, because on this drum it's wide open. If I had a pillow in there, I probably would bury the beater in the head. And if I'm rebounding, if I'm letting it rebound and I'm using my entire leg, I'll bring the ball of my foot back a little bit, John. I'll bring it back a little bit on the pedal board. One good exercise to work on, start soft. Just ankle. Still ankle. Now I'm going to raise my heel. Now I'm going to bring the heel back. Now I'm going to bring it back up. Now I'm going to drop my heel. So a crescendo, decrescendo exercise in eighth notes to work on dynamics, because, you know, in a New York minute, you might be playing really loud and then you need to play really, really soft, right? So that would be a way of practicing that technique. Now, with, I hope that helps, John. I hope that helps, and thank you for the question. In the handout, Set Up the Band, this is an excerpt from my book, Inside the Big Band Drum Chart, which is a book, MP3, CD, and DVD, but I think now all of the audio and video files are downloadable. It's available through Mel Bay, but this is an excerpt from it. And essentially, there's two things to be considered when you read this and you're checking this out. Is when you're playing figures, right, in a big band context or a small group context, if there's a drum part, check out the articulation markings that are written above each note, okay? And there'll be three articulation markings primarily. There'll be a legato marking, right, or a dash. There'll be a marcato marking or a rooftop accent, which is short, right? So the dash is legato or long. The rooftop accent is a short articulation, and an accent can be long or short depending upon the note value that it accompanies. You'll often also see a staccato or just a dot, right? So just those 4 basic articulation markings. Dot is short, rooftop accent is short, legato marking is a dash, that's long. An accent can be long or short depending on the note value. So in that first 4-bar phrase, we have an accent over a dotted quarter note, followed by a rooftop accent or marcato, which is short, followed by an accent over an 8th note. That'll actually be long because they're bebop 8th notes if they're swung. Another accent on beat 2 of the 3rd bar, and beat 4 is a marcato marking. Long, short, and then you have legato, marcato, legato, marcato, marcato. So long, short, short. The reason those markings are important is that they signify length, and we want to get as close to the horns as we possibly can when we're playing articulation markings and rhythms from arrangements. So we approximate the length of those notes using our cymbals and our drums. So if we have a long sound and we're reading a chart, we're interpreting now. We're reading and we're interpreting. Okay? That's really important. Learn the arrangement, listen to the horns, try to sound like a lead trumpet player, or lead alto player, lead trombone player. We're trying to make our drums sound like a horn player. The horns in the big band are trying to subdivide and play time with the accuracy and awareness as a drummer. And when that meets in the middle, we have the power and the impact of a big band. So that phrase, if we play our longs here, cymbal with bass drum, and we play our shorts here on the snare drum, we can articulate that line, that written line. And that would be the first step. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Now, in the second bar on the and of 3, there's no articulation. However, it is an 8th note tied to a quarter note. And if a horn player would play that 8th note tied to a quarter note, they're going to accent it because they're holding it for a beat and a half. So I put an accent on there, even though it's not written. One more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay? So once you have the articulation, you have the backbone of the phrase. And that's the most important. That's the most important, because when you're playing with a band, horn players aren't going to articulate and play rhythm exactly together. Hell, they may not even come in. They may be on Facebook, you know. They might drop their damn mute and not even come in at all. So as a big band drummer, you're the ad hoc conductor. So you're trying to like get everybody to come in at the right time, and that's what setting the band really means. You know, you're setting the table. You're using a silver platter approach. You're playing fills that are obvious so that everyone knows, wow, we're coming into the shout chorus. This is the most exciting part of the arrangement. Bam! And then everyone hits together, hopefully. That's what setting up a band means. But there's also this idea of playing different styles and different tempos. So if you're playing that same phrase, at a slower tempo, you can use smaller subdivisions, right? You can use 16th notes or 16th note triplets if you're playing at a slower tempo. That's example number 1, right? So example number 1, marking quarter note of 84 beats per minute, you see 8th note triplets is the setup, you see 16th notes, because the tempo will allow for those smaller subdivisions. When you're at a medium tempo, now we're into more 8th note triplets and 8th notes, setting up those figures. At a faster tempo like 280 or above, it's all 8th notes and quarter notes. So I'll demonstrate. I'm not going to read the transcription. I'll leave that up to your imagination when you're home practicing. But I'll play the figures and I'll play the articulations. I'll play 4 bars at a time and then 4 bars of the phrase. Okay? 1, 2, 4 bars a time. 3, 4. Well, let me get it at 84 first. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can play more drummy. You could play more. You could be more active at that slower rate. It's expected. It's expected to dump the truck. It's expected to dump the truck at that tempo. You know, the band can feel that pulse. They can feel that pulse strong. Now, when we get into more of a medium rate, 1, 2, 4 bars at a time, 2, 3. Now, the other thing I should mention, you see in these examples, you're probably saying to yourself, Steve, I know you're a drummer, but there's 4 bars in the phrase, but in your transcription there's 5. So why is there 5 bars in your transcriptions and only 4 bars in your phrase? Well, the reason for that, it's not because I'm poor at math. It's because that is a setup measure. So there's a setup bar, only 1 bar, and then there's a double bar line, and then you're into it. So in these transcriptions, in the second line, and in the third line, and in the fourth line, on that first page, the second measure, the second written measure, is actually the first bar of your initial phrase at the top. Just so you know, as you follow along, as you're practicing it. But at a medium rate, it might sound something like this: 2, 4 bars at a time. 2, 3. 2, 3. Still, I'm honoring the articulation markings. I'm putting my shorts here. I'm putting my longs here. I'm supporting my long sound with the bass drum because this is high, this is low. Together they're blended. They're a new sound, a more fuller sound. Now at a really fast rate, if you're playing bebop, a bebop chart, and you have that figure, you have that phrase, that written phrase, you don't have the time to play all of that. So let me play 8 bars a time, and then I'll play those 4 bars. So it'll be a 12-bar phrase or a blues, right? A 12-bar blues. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. At that tempo, I'm basically playing. I'm not moving too much. I'm using the ride cymbal as my crash. I'm not really crossing over my body. If I had a crash here, I probably wouldn't use it. I would stay on the cymbal because the tempo is so fast that if I get off that cymbal and I move over here, it's probably going to slow the time down. Or if I move over here, the time's probably going to slow down. If I move too much around the drums, the time might bog. And in a big band, Jake Hanna once said this, the great big band drummer who played with the Woody Herman band in the early 1960s. If you ever want to hear someone play in a big band and play killer fast, very, very fast tempos, like 400 beats per minute or faster, check out Jake Hanna with Woody Herman. He told me once, he said, playing a big band, Steve, is like lifting an anchor. It's like lifting an anchor. The whole band is the anchor and they're trying to drag you down. Someone asked him once in a clinic, what does it feel like to play in a band of any size? He said, well, if it's a big band, for example, I want you to take 16 metronomes, and I want you to set up 16 metronomes at 16 different tempos, and then you count off the tempo that you want it to be at while those 16 other tempos are going. You know, and in some respects, not to sound cynical, but in some respects it does feel like that sometimes, where it's not going to gel. It's not going to feel like your play along. When you're playing with the play along track that came with your method book, where everything is quantized, everything's with a click track, everything's perfect, and you're playing with the click and everything's locked in, that's great. But when you're playing with live musicians in a band and there's no click track, you're the click track. You're the reference point, right? So that's why it's really important to practice with a metronome as much as you can. Work with a metronome. Have fun with a metronome. This is the last thing I want to share with you guys today. Timekeeping tips. I'll make this about a 5-minute or less explanation, and then we'll wrap it up. If you have any questions, you can email me. You can certainly email me. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. But for example, metronome. Working with a metronome. Most of us will practice with the quarter note. Could everyone hear that?
Yep.
So we're going to practice like this, with the quarter note in the down position. And that gets boring after a while. So sometimes we can play double time against that and think about each click as its own half note. So now the click is a half note. So practice your exercises in this position with the metronome on the half note. If we insert a measure of 3/4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Now the hi-hat, now the click is on 2 and 4. Now I'm going to insert another bar 3/4 and it'll turn back around again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1. Right? So shifting the click from its standard downbeat position to 2 and 4, 1 and 3, 2 and 4. We can also insert a little 2/8 motive. If we think of the ride cymbal as a 12/8 pattern, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. If we insert a little 2/8 rhythm, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1. Now the metronome is on the end of the beat. If I insert another 2/8 motive or 11/8 bar, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 1. Now it's in the third position of the triplet. Now we insert another 11/8 bar and it comes back around. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 1. Do the same thing when you're practicing New Breed or any Motown or Stax recordings, anything funky, James Brown recordings, playing maybe something funky, maybe Bill Withers, something funky, playing quarter note on the downbeat. 1, if we insert a measure of 15, 16, it'll shift. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1 and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1, 2, 3. One, two, three, 4. 1, 2, 3. Then it'll come back around again. Two, three. So a little fun with the metronome, a little click shifting example from that handout to work on so that your practicing becomes more creative when working with the metronome. It'll help you become a more solid reference point when you're working with a band that doesn't have a metronome and doesn't have a click track. You're playing live and you're working with a vocalist that might be rushing or dragging, or you might be playing with a bass player that's rushing or dragging. You'll become more sensitive to time. You'll become more aware of your tendencies. You'll become more aware of when time is pushing or when time is dragging. You'll be more sensitive to subdivision when you practice the subdivisions, and that's exactly what that is. You're practicing the subdivisions by shifting the click. It's one thing to count, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a, but when you shift the click like that and make the new one the E, make the new one the and, make the new one the you become very, very sensitive to any kind of variable speeding up or slowing down in tempo when playing with a band. So, gosh, I hope you guys had a good time today. I know it was a little bit stream of consciousness, but there's nothing more that I love than talking about this instrument. I've been playing this instrument now almost 50 years, and got my first set of drums in 1972. My mom and dad bought me a 1966 Ludwig Champagne Sparkle drum kit, and you know, I've been trying to figure it out ever since. You know, it kicks my butt every day. Every time I sit down and try to work on something new, it just kicks my butt. Consider myself a working drummer. I love to play. I love this instrument. You know, it's a major part of my life, and you know, the more time you spend with it, the more love you give it, the more love it gives you back. You know, just remember, for all the younger musicians on the call, this is a lifelong journey. This career in music, if you want to have a career in music, it's a long distance race. It's not a sprint by any means. So, you know, getting really good at a really young age is great, but there's always more to learn. You know, there's more to learn about drumming. There's more to learn about music, music making, composition, arranging, conducting, touring, tech, recording. There's just, it never ends. And, you know, maintain that curiosity, have fun, keep working at it, and please stay well. Please stay well. And thank you so much, Alex, for this opportunity to talk to everyone today and help out. I'd also like to thank Jeff Mulvihill and Rick DeYoung and Mark Bennett at Mapex Drums for this beautiful instrument, the Mapex Design Lab Series Cherry Bomb kit with a Heritage 6x14-inch snare drum. Just love this set of drums. It plays me. I don't play it. It's just so beautiful. I sit down behind it and it relaxes me. When I play, I feel more relaxed, which means I'm probably playing in a more musical way. At least I hope. At least that's what I'm telling myself. And so, so again, thank you, Alex, and thank you all for taking some time on this Friday evening to spend with me, and I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I hope you got a little something out of it.
Steve, no, thank you, man. It's talk about a masterclass, right? Always learning, always learning. It's not just you're learning your creativity, but I mean it was awesome just all around. So we really appreciate it. I've gotten a lot of comments directly to me that say thank you. That people had to jet a little bit early, but that it was fantastic. We are recording this, everyone. So what I'm gonna do within the next week is everybody registered. I'll get the video out to you, as well as it'll go up on our masterclass YouTube channel at West Music. So again, thanks to Steve and thanks to Mapex. Without them, we wouldn't have been able to do this. So it's just been fantastic. So I'm sure after the call, we're all going to jump on the pad in after this. So yeah, again, thanks everyone. We're going to let you go and have a great rest of your Friday and get after it. So thanks everybody.